Tonight's class, we continue chapter 32, and we are going to understand why is loving another Jew the entire Torah. Hope you enjoy. Please feel free to subscribe.
And this is like our last class in the month of Menachem Av. Menachem means comfort. The only real comfort, of course, is the redemption, is Mashiach. So we're coming from that place of comfort and going into the month of Elul, which is the month of God's compassion. As the first Rebbe of Chabad, who we refer to as the Alter Rebbe, explains with a beautiful, beautiful parable of the king who comes out into the field. So the commoners, we are common. So the commoners can all greet him. And as they run to him, the king just gives them such a smile, so much love, so much compassion. And that's the entire month. I have a friend who once told me she feels like every day is imagine someone just gave you a credit card with no cap. That's the month of Elul. So we're in this awesome juxtaposition from the end of this month of Menachem, of comfort, of the redemption, and going into this final month of the year, this month of Elul, this month of compassion, this month of God in the field, meaning as the first leader of the Chabad dynasty, the Alter Rebbe explains that really every day is so intense. God's 13 attributes of compassion are shining. And as such, it should be a holiday. Rosh Hashanah is a holiday, Yom Kippur is a holiday, Sukkot is a holiday. It should be a holiday. We should be in synagogue for a month. But instead, the king's in the field. He's with us, with our grind, with our careers, with our work, with our shopping, with our cleaning, with our dealing with life, and we're with the king. So it's a very special energy, and it starts this Shabbos, this Saturday, and continues for an entire month until Rosh Hashanah. So now that we know it's such a special time, we're going to start learning Tanya. So last week, we began chapter 32. To be completely accurate, 2 weeks ago, we sort of overviewed it. Last week, we really began it, and we are going to continue now. Now, what did we say was so special? Well, Lamed Beis is the Hebrew letters for 32. And in Hebrew, numbers are the energy of the words themselves. The numbers are forming these words. So these are really letters, and yet they're numbers. So Lamed Beis is a number, it's 32, and it's a word. And the word is Lev, which means heart. So this is the heart of Tanya. Because the heart, the core emotional energy of Tanya, if I can say of Judaism, is love. In this chapter, it's all about loving another Jew. And as is explained in the Hayom Yom, I think the second work of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, loving a Jew and loving God is like the same thing. When you love a Jew, you're loving God because you're loving who God loves. When you love a Jew, you're loving God because the core of every Jew is God. So we're loving God here, which of course we speak throughout the entire time about loving God, by loving his only child, us, me, the Jew. So we explained in this chapter that the dilemma or the challenge in loving a Jew is that in the Torah, when it discusses this commandment, it's a commandment. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's not a thing you want to do. It's actually a commandment. God's actually commanding you an emotion, which is sort of interesting, but that's a separate discussion. The commandment states, love your fellow, meaning your fellow Jew, as you love yourself. If we didn't have that last, as you love yourself, is 4 words in English. In Hebrew, it's 1 word. And because it's as yourself. And that's what makes it so hard. Because how could I love anyone as I love myself? We said, your children. Some of us love our children as ourselves. Maybe your spouse, maybe a very close friend. But here we're being told there's 15 million Jews in the world and you're supposed to love them all like you love yourself. You can be nice to them. You can be respectful. You can be polite. How do you love them? And as yourself. So the Alter Rebbe's basic premise is every Jew in our core, in the core essence of me and of you, we are our soul. That's a defining quality. It's what makes us a Jew. And it's what makes you, you. What makes me, me. The I, my essence, I is my soul. And on the level of soul, we are actually one. Because all of our souls in our origin started off as one. And then we traveled. We fragmented. We traveled. And actually, when we traveled, we had different journeys, different triptychs. And some of ours were longer and some of ours were shorter. And the ones that were longer, their powers got a little more concealed. And the ones that were shorter, their powers are more like the original point. So when I look at any other Jew, and my message last week was, if you can't always do this for the difficult ones. If you look at any other Jew, focus on soul. The core is soul. On the level of soul, we're one. And actually, on the level of soul, this person could be far more special than me because I have no clue her soul. I have, for that matter, no clue my soul. And even though, of course, we started off as one, but we all traveled. And maybe her soul traveled far shorter than mine. And as such, her soul, which is what I'm valuing here in myself and in her, is still at a much higher space. I have no clue. And of course, we know that the Rebbe doesn't say there's always this pendulum theory of life. So if they're actually very, very, very difficult, that probably means their soul powers are very, very great, because it has to be balanced out here. So who knows how powerful, how beautiful, how majestic is this soul? If I value soul, wow. And then we went on to say that with this, we can actually understand, and this is what we just began at the end of the class, we can understand one of those nice things that if you really think about them, it's hard to understand them, which is the statement of Hillel, the elder. There are actually a number of Hillels in our history, but this is the original. All the rest were his descendants. The original Hillel, who said that the entire Torah can be encapsulated in this one commandment of loving another Jew. So before we continue with that, did anyone have any great war stories from the week? Anyone do any work along these lines? Anyone remembered, was inspired, did something different?
I have a question. It's a little bit, I was thinking about this. So how you, when we say the word love, it's this the word love has probably so many definitions. It became like diluted. What exactly love? So according to what we're learning now, you're talking about the word love in a very, very essence-wise meaning. Like, so we think, we wish to the person, to the Jew, exactly the same as we wish to ourselves, right? I would say this is what we're talking about, the word love, right?
Well, it's interesting because Hebrew is a very holy tongue. We actually call it, biblical Hebrew is called the holy tongue, Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. And the root word of the word love in Hebrew the word love is ahava. And the root word for that is hav, which isn't a common word in Hebrew, but it is the root word of ahava. And hav means to give.
Okay.
So in essence, yes, the behavioral expression of this emotion, and at the same time, that which helps us engender this emotion is giving. So
Okay.
as we give, we love. Giving expresses the love, and giving deepens our love. I guess that's why mothers love their children so much, because we give and give and give and give and give because they're helpless for so many years, and that deepens and deepens and deepens our love. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that about a couple. He says that when you start off your marriage, Lubavitcher Rebbe says, there's a tiny little flame. You have a little flame and your spouse has a little flame. Don't fool yourself. It's a little flame. But then hopefully you spend a lifetime giving to each other every day, day in and day out, in all the myriads of ways. And every time it just like increases and increases and increases that little flame till it becomes this fire, this one fused fire that makes the two of you one in the marriage, that marriage. Goldie said that lev, which is heart, is like the English word love. That is so interesting. I'm going to comment on that. I'm not saying this is true, but I'm piggybacking on what Goldie said. Goldie showed that this interesting similarity of the word for heart in Hebrew and the word of love in English, lev and love. So sometimes in the Torah, we find words, unusual words, and Rashi, who's a classical commentator, he explains them, oh, this is in this language, this is in this language, this is in this language. And the question is like, what's going on? Why would these foreign languages be in Torah? And Torah predated creation. Torah existed before time, before world, before man. So how do we have these foreign languages in Torah? And why would Torah choose to use a foreign word? So it's a question, that's for sure a question. And there are many different answers for it. But an answer I once saw that I thought was very interesting is that the original language of the world was the Holy Tongue. Before the Tower of Babylonia, when man's language got fragmented into 70 different ones, there was only one language. The whole world spoke the godly tongue. That was it. There was no other language. And then we had 70, from which, of course, splintered into many others. Every one of those 70, though, are really in their core deriving their energy from the Holy Tongue. And therefore, in each language of those 70, obviously English is Anglo-Saxon, but I mean, if you go back to the source, in each language of the 70, you are going to find words of or very close to biblical Hebrew, because that's really that spark that entered that language and which is sort of the core of the energy of that language. Very interesting. So you know what? This could be English's. It's very interesting thought. Just as the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, or the Rebbe explains, and he brings a story from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe to enhance this idea. There's a very foundational talk of the Rebbe, and you can get it in English, and English is translated, on the essence of Hasidus. This is a Hasidic gathering on the Rosh Hashanah of the Hasidic holiday, which is the 19th of Kislev. I think maybe like 1965. I could be wrong in the year. And in which the Rebbe explores what is the essence of Hasidus? What is Hasidus? And the beginning of this, explaining more what is Torah, to understand what Torah is and to understand what Hasidus is, the Rebbe brings out one of his points he's explaining there is that the only true knowledge, wisdom, truth in the world is Torah. And therefore, any other body of knowledge that exists has to have some spark of Torah in it. And that's its energy. That does not give a hechsher, a kosher certification on that body of knowledge. There might be lots in it that's fraudulent, that's wrong, that's mistaken, and it's man-made. But if it exists, it has to have some element of Torah in it. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist at all. And therefore, we see this. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen this, that you look at some such knowledge or wisdom and you're like, what? That idea is just like what I learned in, that's so reminiscent of, and it is. Because it has to have something. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. That piece of truth doesn't mean it's all true. There might be a lot of falseness, but it has to have that core truth. And the story the Rebbe relates is with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was traveling on a train. Nowadays, people are into gadgets, people are into technology, people are into granite countertops. In those days, people were into ideological isms, especially political isms. So he's traveling on a train, and all these different people, Jews, were all arguing what's the best political system. Is it Bundism, socialism, communism, democracy? And they were each trying to prove that theirs was the correct one. This political ideology was the right one. And seeing the revered figure of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they turned to him and said, for each one was proving how their political ideology is actually Torah. It's actually Torah-based. It's actually in consonance with Torah. And they're proving it. And they each did so. And then they sort of said to him, so like, no, which is the real one? And he said, every one of them has Torah in it. If it didn't have Torah in it, it wouldn't exist. But that piece of Torah in it doesn't mean it's a correct ideology. It just means it exists. Anyway, so that's love. Ahava, have, to give. We give, and we feel, and we feel, and we give. So really, going back to Miriam's question, you can say, well, I'm not giving to 15 million people. I don't even know them. True, but there's a general giving to Jews because they're Jews. And that deepens our feeling for Jews. And then when you encounter the specific one, you can apply it in that direction. So again, anyone have any experience over this past week that they've remembered anything from this chapter and something happened because of it?
Well, what I would like to say is that, I mean, especially since I moved here and living in a more Hasidic community. So, I mean, every time I go out and I see all these Yidden and kids, I think it's just natural that your heart is filled with love, you know, to your surroundings. I don't know, it's just, I don't think about it, but I know that I feel that. It's not that I did something unusual this week, but in general, that's how I feel when I get out of here. I just like, my heart is filled with love when I see all these kids and people, you know, walking around. I think it's a natural thing for a Yid.
That is so beautiful. And what I would say is, it's really precious you still have that. Because sometimes, like you're saying, if you're not in an environment with religious people and then you come, you know, it hits you, but it's nice that you still feel it. I know for myself, like, let's say if we're driving to New York or East Coast and you're in like, you know, like a rest stop and you see another Jew, it's such an exciting, wonderful feeling. And I know, like, sometimes even thinking, wow, if I met this person on Devon, I wouldn't notice them. But when you see them in a rest stop, like, you feel that pull, like, we're one. Obviously, God forbid, if you hear of a tragedy, you hear of something going on in Israel, you feel that pull in your heart. We're one.
Right.
But it's nice to feel it on a regular basis. All right, so we will continue exploring why did Hillel the Elder state that this commandment, it's a commandment, it's commanding an emotion. And as we're saying, there is, of course, the behavioral component, but it's the commandment is the emotion. Why is this the entire Torah? So I did give you the answer last week at the end quickly, but now we're going to really hear it in the words of the Rebbe with, of course, a lot more detail. So we are, V'zeh shekasav Hillel hazaken, that's Amar Hillel hazaken, al kiyum mitzvah zu. And this is what Hillel the Elder said about fulfilling this commandment, this emotional commandment to love. You want to know the entire Torah? This is the entire Torah. All the rest is commentary. All the rest is a lot more details. Why? Because the foundation, the roots of the entire Torah, twofold. There's a twofold foundation for all of Torah. One, Lahagbiya ulaha'alos hanefesh al haguf maila ad ikra v'sharsha defol almin. One is to elevate the soul over the body higher and higher and higher until her source, actually not her source, higher than her source, as we discussed last chapter, to the source of all worlds. That's one foundational purpose of everything we're doing in this world. And the second, Vigam, and also to draw down the infinite light of God into Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people, the repository of all of our souls, and all of us. Kimoshe Kasa will come, and as will be explained later. Dahainu, meaning to say, Knesset Yisrael technically means Bimkar Nishmos Kol Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael is an address on a spiritual dimension. In the spiritual world, we have our little solar system of 4 spiritual realities, and then our physical world, which is a physical manifestation of the 4th one. The first of those 4 realities, planet Atzilus from the word Eitzel, which means next to, because it's so close to God, it's like next to God. And Atzilus from the word Ne'etzal, Ne'etzal, which means like emerged. We can't even call it a creation. It's so close to God. It just is like a natural emerging from God's energy. So in that highest world, and of course, world is a very broad term, and there's myriads and myriads and myriads of levels in these worlds. But keeping it simple, we've got 4 spiritual realities, each of which has many, many realities within it, and then our physical reality. So on this highest reality, Atzilus, where basically it's godliness, it's too high to have a Gan Eden. Gan Eden is a term which in the Christian world they would call heaven. Gan Eden is a place where the souls go after they finish their journey in this world while they're waiting for us to get our act together and bring the redemption. So there are Gan Edens, repositories of the souls, where the souls can bask in the energy they've created in this world, primarily through their Torah study. Primarily through Torah study. For the commandments, we can see that benefit by the redemption, but Gan Eden is primarily everything we've accomplished in our study of Torah. And there are Gan Edens, but not in Atzilus. It's too high for Gan Eden. There are some souls there that are too high for Gan Eden, like the forefathers, Moshe, Moses, Aaron, some very, very, very high souls, some very, very, very high angels. It's a very high place. And God's energies. And in the 10th energy of God, the 10th and final energy, called in the Hebrew Malchus, which means sovereignty, that in that level of energy is found Knesset Yisrael. Knesset means a gathering. Like a synagogue is called a Beis Knesset, Beit Knesset. It's a place of gathering to worship. So Knesset Yisrael, the ingathering of the Jews, really means the repository of all souls. Not souls that have finished their mission in this world and are probably in some level of Gan Eden, some after this life waiting for redemption, place of reward. But souls that have not yet come down, they're in that space where they're waiting, they're in this source. All of our souls are still linked to that level. In, again, Malchus, the 10th and final dimension, in the highest world of Atzilus, all of our souls have a relationship to that source of the repository of our souls. Knesset Yisrael, the ingathering of all souls in the 10th dimension, the final dimension, the first world, Malchus of Atzilus. To such a degree that actually we're told that sometimes, we'll discuss this in chapter 41, we're in 32 and we go at a very leisurely pace. So I don't know when we're going to get there, but there's a beautiful concept in chapter 41 that you can always choose to do something good for someone else. You can choose to, let's say someone needs a merit. You can do anything good, enhance anything you're doing, or do something you're not doing and say, God, this isn't for my bank account, it's for theirs. If you know someone's suffering in a certain area, you can try to do a commandment that's roughly has to do with that, or you could just do any good thing. You can say, God, this is for this person. It could be a person very close to you. It could be a friend. It could be anyone in your world. God, I'm doing this for that person. That's a true concept. It works. I've seen amazing cures and miracles that happen when people do that, because of course it's a very beautiful thing to God that someone says, I'm doing good selflessly. It's not for me, it's for someone else. But if you want to be really selfless, you can say, God, this good deed is not for me. It's not for my friend. It's not for my family. It's not for my child. It's for the Jewish people. This good deed, I want to go to the Jewish people. And then the energy of that deed enters Knesset Yisrael, this repository of all souls above. And from Knesset Yisrael, it then trickles down to each one of us, because we each have a relationship. So the Rebbe is saying here that we have this twofold, this duality of what everything we do all day long is supposed to accomplish. We're supposed to be sending energy up to God, sending spiritual energy, sending our soul energy up, and we're supposed to be drawing the energy down, drawing it down to Knesset Yisrael, and of course from Knesset Yisrael, drawing it down to us as a whole, and of course for each one of us individually.